Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
President Biden tested negative last night for COVID-19 and tested negative again today. He's not experiencing any symptoms. As far as the steps he is taking, since the president was with the First Lady yesterday, he will be masking while indoors and around people in alignment with CDC guidance. And as has been the practice in the past, the president will remove his mask when sufficiently distanced from others indoors and while outside as well.
That was the voice of Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre announcing yesterday that the President of the United States, Joe Biden, is taking precautions after the news broke that First Lady Dr. Jill Biden tested positive for COVID-19. COVID-19 is still very real. People are still being infected. In fact, people are still dying despite the massive propaganda campaign that is being waged against society to convince us of two things. They're trying to convince us that COVID-19 was never real. Actually, three things. That COVID-19 was a pandemic. And then they're trying to convince us that masks don't work. And they're also trying to convince us that vaccines don't work. Not only vaccines don't work, they want to convince you that vaccines are the reason we're seeing an uptick in so much cardiovascular health and distress and emergencies and deaths after COVID-19, despite the fact that COVID-19 is a cardiovascular disease. I know we're starting a little heavy this morning, but let's get right down to it. Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and gender nonconforming individuals to another episode of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Today is Wednesday, September 6, 2023. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, we have a lot of stories to cover this morning, a lot of miles to go. We have to talk about Enrique Tarrio, the Proud Boy who has just been sentenced to 22 years in prison. We also have to talk about what's happening in Oklahoma with their radical school board superintendent, the state superintendent. And we also have to talk about this video of a young black woman who was struck in the face by a brick by someone who turned her down. She was asked for her phone number and she turned the man down and he hit her with a brick. I have to talk about that coming up later in today's episode because of the significance of the conversation to the black community. But first, let's dig into this propaganda, this concerted effort to make sure that we never wear masks again. Upon the news of President Biden choosing to mask after his wife tested positive for COVID-19, the response from the conservative echo chamber, the Republican echo chamber, the response from Republican candidates for president really is in lockstep with this agenda to maximize the amount of people infected with COVID-19. And I know that may sound hyperbolic, but after 4 years of this, it's hard to come to any other conclusion when we see people engaging in the most anti-science and the most amount of propaganda that I have ever seen in my life. Let's begin with this clip from Michael Smerconish on CNN. He has a weekend show. I've been on his show before. Here's his interview with Dr. Anthony Fauci, and I want you to listen to the very specific study that he references, trying to make the case that masks don't work. He references a very specific study, and then I have evidence for you after the clip. Listen in.
There is a perception out there by many, how many I don't know, that they don't work and that the data concludes that they didn't work in the first go round. Respond to that on masks.
There's no doubt that masks work. Different studies give different percentages of advantage of wearing it, but there's no doubt that the weight of the studies, and there have been many studies, indicate the benefit of wearing masks.
I'm going to refer to one of them. You've heard about it before. I heard about it from a number of radio callers. Brett Stevens in The Times talked about Cochrane. Put that on the screen. The most rigorous and comprehensive analysis of scientific studies conducted on the efficacy of masks for reducing the spread of respiratory illness, including COVID-19, was published last month. Its conclusions, said Tom Jefferson, the Oxford epidemiologist who is the lead author, were unambiguous. There is just no evidence that masks, make any difference. He told the journalist Mayan Demasi, full stop. But wait, hold on. What about the N95 masks as opposed to the lower quality surgical or cloth masks? Makes no difference. None of it, he said. Well, what about the studies that initially persuaded policymakers to impose mask mandates? They were convinced by non-randomized studies, flawed observational studies.
Now, I want to pause there. Dr. Fauci did respond, but Dr. Fauci's response was woefully insufficient. I mean, to the point where I don't know why he even went on the show. Now, before I give you the response to this very specific study, I want us to pause and reflect on what Michael Smerconish is forwarding to his entire audience on CNN. And not to mention, this is the clip that the right-wing echo chamber has been sending across social media to the tune of 20 to 30 million views. Right. So this went well beyond just the CNN audience. This has been something that has been specifically promoted to promote the idea that masks don't work at all. I hope you really absorbed what this Cochrane study is suggesting and what Michael Smerconish is forwarding, and that what, quite honestly, Dr. Fauci let slide by. Because it didn't take much research to find. It didn't take a lot of work to go to Cochrane.org and to find their statement on this specific study, in which they said the following, quote, "Many commentators have claimed that a recently updated Cochrane review shows that, quote, masks don't work, which is an inaccurate and misleading interpretation." And they went on to say this, quote, "The original plain language summary for this review stated that, quote, we are uncertain whether masks or N95 P2 respirators help to slow the spread of respiratory viruses based on the studies we assessed. This wording was open to misinterpretation, for which we apologize." These are the very people who conducted the study that Michael Smerconish shared on his show. The very people, Cochrane, they have come back to apologize for their misleading headline and to make it clear that commentators are misrepresenting their data.
How do we get beyond that finding of that particular review?
Well, it's pretty easily. Number one, your producers should have caught this and not allowed it to go on air. But then number two, Dr. Anthony Fauci, if anyone should know this information, it should be you. But unfortunately, he didn't know.
Yeah, but there are other studies, Michael, that show at an individual level for individual. When you're talking about the effect on the epidemic or the pandemic as a whole, the data are less strong. But when you talk about as an individual basis of someone protecting themselves or protecting themselves from spreading it to others, there's no doubt that there are many studies that show that there is an advantage. When you took at the broad population level, like the Cochrane study, the data are less firm with regard to the effect on the overall pandemic. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about an individual's effect on their own safety. That's a bit different than the broad population level.
Now, listen, I've been doing political commentary and debate for some time, and I know when a person knows what they know, and I know when they don't know. Dr. Fauci was not aware of or not willing to share the fact that the Cochrane study, the very people who conducted the study at Cochrane.org, look it up yourself, have stated that the interpretation that is being forwarded, that masks don't work, is misleading. They stated that back in March. This is September. There's no excuse for Smerconish or Anthony Fauci to not know it. But at this point, we are living in such a inundated stage of propaganda that I'm not sure if they didn't know about it. I feel like perhaps they did know that this study was debunked. They're too high up in their positions. Their researchers at CNN could have easily found this, and Anthony Fauci should have had this on a speed dial. But what happened? Fake news about masks not working has been spread all over the internet just in time for the latest surge of COVID-19. We'll be back with more of the Benjamin Dixon Show right after this.
I'm in sync with the earth. 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'ma ride for the squad, let her ties in a hearse. I've been on a vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in
Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Coming up after the Patron party, I will be discussing the 22-year sentence that was handed down to Proud Boy leader Enrique Tarrio. Funny enough, he is of Hispanic descent, and he is one of the leading voices for a white supremacist movement known as the Proud Boys. But I digress. We'll be discussing that along with all of the other issues surrounding January 6th, which is still very important for us to keep our eyes on because they're not done with their insurrection. They're not done. Even though a few of them are going to jail, they are not done with that. And speaking of January 6th, of course, we know the case that's happening down in Georgia, the RICO case against 19 defendants, including Donald John Trump. We'll discuss that momentarily, but I want to bring up another RICO case that's happening in the state of Georgia. Over 60 individuals in Georgia have been indicted on racketeering, influence, and corrupt organization charges related to their opposition to the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center known as Cop City. We've covered this for some time back when there were domestic terrorism charges levied against about 40 individuals who had been organizing and gathering in the forest. They have been known as the Forest Defenders. They have been trying to protect the 90 acres of land, that publicly owned land that has been donated to the policing agencies that are behind this attempt to build a playground for police officers. They're going to have a movie set, not a movie theater, but a movie set, a helo pad, all kinds of toys and gadgets for them to quote unquote train. Well, in opposition to that, there have been activists who have made homes in the forest on publicly owned land, and they have stood there to oppose this seizure of land, this destruction of the forest, and this promotion that the cops are being given in the wake of the George Floyd protests. Listen, before I go any deeper, I need people to understand Cop City is the giveaway, the participation trophy, the consolation prize given to police who had to endure the George Floyd protest. I put it that way because when we pause and ask ourselves, what did black people get out of what happened to George Floyd and all of the protests? We didn't get any criminal justice reform. We didn't get any type of reforms at all with the policing agency. The only thing we got was more police. We didn't get any protection of our voting rights. We didn't get the George Floyd justice and all those acts that the Congress promised. That we did nothing. But what did the police get? Well, they got a $90 million facility that's going to sit on so many acres in the middle of the public forest that's owned by the people. And there have been protesters who have been holding the line against this for a few years now. It's been a while. And those individuals, 60 of them now, are facing RICO charges. RICO charges. And so when we talk about Georgia and we talk about RICO, while that RICO charge has been used efficiently against the criminal syndicate that is the Trump organization and their attempt to overturn the election results, we're now seeing the same RICO statute be used against activists, forest defenders. And I want you to listen very closely to how these individuals are being described. The indictment characterizes the opposition movement known as Defend the Atlanta Forest as an enterprise of militant anarchists, eco-activists, and community organizers. What? Community organizers? Now being a community organizer is considered to be a part of a RICO statute. What's essentially going on, and I have a clip from Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr, who is prosecuting the case. He has been hinting that they were going to do this for some time. So the clip I'm going to play is a little old, but it gives you an idea of how long they have been preparing to wage this type of war against activists who are trying to defend the forest, who are trying to defend the black community that is right next to these acres that the cops want to use. And they're trying to stand against this promotion, this participation trophy prize. There's literally not a single need or a reason for this facility to exist, except for the fact that the cops are spoiled and get literally everything they want or ask for. And this is being committed not by Republicans in the city of Atlanta. Nope. This is not being committed by white folks in the city of Atlanta. This is being sent down by black Democrats in Atlanta, this leadership class, including my favorite Keisha Lance Bottoms, right? She initiated this. And now Andre Dickens, he is the mayor of Atlanta now, who is pushing this. Listen to Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr as he explains this case.
As I've said for months, the state of Georgia would not tolerate the repeated acts of violence and destruction that have occurred in an attempt to stop the construction of the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center, a state-of-the-art facility for firefighters, EMTs, and law enforcement. I vowed as Attorney General to hold accountable those responsible for those actions. Today, I am pleased to announce the latest development in our vigorous pursuit of the suspects. Following an investigation conducted by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the Atlanta Police Department, the Georgia Department of Public Safety, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and other law enforcement partners, our office took this case to a Fulton County grand jury on August 29th. Based on the evidence we presented, the grand jury has returned an indictment charging 61 people with violation of the Georgia Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. Some are also charged with domestic terrorism, attempted arson in the first degree, and money laundering. As alleged in the indictment, the defendants are members of Defend the Atlanta Forest, an anarchist, anti-police, and anti-business extremist organization. We contend these 61 defendants together have conspired to prevent the construction of the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center by conducting, coordinating, and organizing acts of violence, intimidation, and property destruction.
Now, I let that play completely through because anyone who has paid attention to this story knows that the violence has come from one side. In fact, the police have killed one of the protesters. And listen, let's call these people what they really are. And I don't mean this in an insulting way, but these are tree huggers. These are peace activists. These are people who have committed their lives. They've set up inside of trees, literally tree houses, to protect the trees. And here they're describing them as some kind of monsters, anarchists who want to destroy. The key phrase in there was that he lumped them in as being anti-business. They are blocking a $90 million project. Those $90 million are supposed to go to some contractor who wants those checks. They want that business. And so we are seeing the complete consolidation of a fascist movement happen right in Atlanta. It's being brought to us by a black Democratic mayor, and it's being waged against people who are trying to defend the environment. All while, by the way, have you noticed how much climate change we really are experiencing? Have you noticed the intensity of the storms? Have you noticed the intensity of the fires? So forgive me if I'm going to side with the people who are not only trying to defend the black community from more police being put right next to their homes, but there are people who are trying to defend the forest, trying to defend the environment from this wasteful spending that's going to create an environmental hazard right there in the middle of public forest lands. But those individuals, those tree huggers, and I mean that in a positive way, those people who are willing to put their lives on the line to protect the environment and to protect the black community from an excess giveaway, something the police don't need. They don't even cut on their body cams after we've given them millions upon millions of dollars of body cameras. They have not stopped killing us despite the fact that we've given them millions upon millions of dollars in training. All right, we'll be back right after this.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions.
And here we go. very special welcome to our newest patrons. A fantastic witch, thank you so much for becoming a patron. Jamal Jackson, thank you so much for becoming a patron. Lauren B, thank you for becoming a patron. Perry Anderson, thank you so much for becoming a patron. And Douglas Brandow, thank you for becoming a patron. This party is for all of you. Turn it up. You too can become a part of this prestigious and most prodigious patron family by going to patreon.com/the BPD show, where you get twice the content, none of the commercial interruptions, and you get access to our upcoming patron party, which is renewed, revitalized, and relaunching soon. Patreon.com/the BPD show, and we will be back right after this commercial break unless you are a patron.
Welcome back to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. Welcome back. I need to start this next segment with a slight disclaimer. I am an abolitionist, in the sense that I believe that our criminal justice system, particularly our prison system, is irredeemable. And it's because of how they intentionally have designed it. And so I am generally opposed to sentencing someone to prison in this system. That said, we live in the system we live in, and prison is still the reality of the United States of America. And until such time as abolition comes, some people need to go to jail. Like Proud Boy leader Enrique Tarrio, who was just sentenced to 22 years in prison for his part in the January 6th insurrection. He was one of the key organizers of that insurrection, and now he is facing 22 years in prison. Imagine going to jail for 22 years for someone like Donald Trump. This is not the first conviction, but this is by far the heaviest sentencing that we have seen so far, to the point where Enrique Tarrio was crying, weeping in court. And as this one CNN reporter lets it be known, multiple defendants from January 6th, Proud Boys, people who wanted to overthrow the government in the name of Donald Trump, they were weeping and sobbing as their sentences were handed down.
And he sobbed alongside that, really, emphasizing what she was trying to get the judge to understand, that she said that Tarrio was not really the person that's been portrayed in court, that he is a smart guy, that he has family members who are police officers. And she said, I beg you to not give him 33 years. In the end, the judge accepted the prosecutor's reference that this was an act of terrorism, but he did not endorse the additional time that would have brought to the sentence. That's the reason why, Wolf, we see him getting 22 years instead of 33 that prosecutors had asked for.
So to be honest, Enrique Tarrio got off easy. He got 22 years instead of the 33 years that prosecutors were asking for. Tarrio is the final Proud Boy leader convicted of seditious conspiracy in the January 6, 2021 attacks. 3 other Proud Boys have been found guilty of the same charge, and they were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 15 to 18 years. What's funny about this, and it is funny to me, is that Republicans are all of a sudden like, oh, my goodness, this is such a harsh sentence. This is such a harsh kind of justice system. Now, this is I want you to watch this. What Enrique Tarrio has been charged with, trying to overthrow, and found guilty and now sentenced, trying to overthrow the federal government. Seditious conspiracy, right? And then now juxtapose that to what's happening in Georgia with the RICO case against the forest defenders, people who were sitting in trees, who were targeted and attacked by the police, the joint task force that raided the forest and killed one of the forest defenders. They are celebrating the 61 and count. The conservatives are celebrating the 61 forest defenders who have been charged under the RICO Act, but they are swearing that the criminal justice system is just so horrible because Donald Trump is being indicted. And because Enrique Tarrio is getting 22 years for literally trying to overthrow the federal government. I need you to juxtapose those two in your head, compare the two. Someone who's trying to overthrow the federal government being viewed as a victim, while the people who are trying to defend the forest in this country are seen as terrorists. And this is from the vantage point of the conservative echo chamber, who is doing their best this morning to make it seem like Enrique Tarrio is facing something unprecedented and that this is the Biden regime going after conservatives. Well, the judge who handed down this decision is a conservative, appointed by a conservative. So, I mean, that there goes your theory, but facts don't really matter to these people. I want to give you one more detail. Although Tarrio wasn't present in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, having been arrested 2 days earlier, prosecutors claim he played a significant role in inciting and encouraging the violence that disrupted Congress's certification of Biden's electoral victory. That is according to the Associated Press. What's funny is that conservatives all around the world, called the country rather, they are using the fact that he wasn't in Washington, D.C. on January 6th as an example of how frivolous this not only his indictment, his conviction, but also his sentencing is. They really are just condemning it all. They're saying, oh my goodness, he wasn't even in Washington, D.C. when the insurrection happened. That's because federal authorities had already picked him up. They were already investigating him. They weren't able to stop the insurrection, but they were able to get the leader of the insurrection, short of Donald Trump, right? Enrique Tarrio was the lead of the forces on the ground, and they got him 2 days before the insurrection.
One of the interesting things about these sentencings is that almost every one of these men has cried as the judge was considering their sentence. In one case, Dominic Pezzola, he was one of the lower level members of the Proud Boys, but he played a key role. He broke those windows that allowed the mob to get into the building. And after he was sentenced, the judge left the room and Pezzola stood up with his fist raised and said, Trump won.
So they were crying. I really played that portion of the clip because I wanted to emphasize the fact that these Proud Boys were crying. All the toughness and all the violence and all the hate-filled rhetoric, when it came down to their sentencing, they were crying and sobbing. But that was even fake because, as you heard at the end, one of them decided to declare Trump won anyway. We're dealing with a breed of people who are willing to go to the most violent extreme imaginable on behalf of their dear leader. And when they are held accountable, they weep and they sob. Well, too bad. You should not have tried to overthrow the government on behalf of Donald Trump. Yep. Coming up in the patrons only episode, you can get access by going to patreon.com/the BPD show. There's so many stories that I haven't had a chance to go through yet. Elon Musk has targeted the Anti-Defamation League on Twitter, calling to ban ADL off of Twitter. And he is also blaming the Anti-Defamation League for the loss of $22 billion worth of value in Twitter, or X. Well, we'll discuss that and why it is based in anti-Semitism and the fact that this is a grown man, billionaire, who can't take responsibility for his own mistakes. His leadership crashed Twitter. Full stop. But that doesn't stop him from blaming the Jews, literally blaming the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. We'll talk about that. Also, we'll be talking about Senator Tommy Tuberville out of Alabama doing his best to undermine the federal government by blocking the key appointments, leadership appointments in the military, the top brass. Tommy Tuberville is blocking them. And now some of the top brass who are in positions are calling on him to stop because he's aiding and abetting our rivals abroad. We'll be discussing that. I also will be going into more detail, or rather talking about this story coming out of New York where a black woman was attacked by a black man who hit her with a brick because she refused to give him her phone number. I've got to deal with this particular story because of how it has broken down in the black community in terms of self-defense of others, in terms of our responsibility to each other, et cetera, et cetera. There are some key characters who are doing their best to ensure that there would never be black power or black community. And that black community
even more so than black power, but black community and black power. Those are key components to the destruction of white supremacy. Full stop. And that we have black people in the black community actively working against that. Well, you follow the money, you'll see that they're being paid by conservatives. We'll talk about that. I want to leave you with one other thought that we'll be discussing in the Patrons Only episode. The football coach, Joe Kennedy, who won his Supreme Court case, ostensibly allowing him to pray privately on the 50-yard line. Well, he's back at school, and he did a big performance on Friday night. He went to the 50-yard line to pray, and all of the white evangelicals are celebrating this as a God-ordained victory. But we know without a shadow of a doubt that Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch literally lied about the facts of the case. And so in our Patrons Only episode, we will be discussing what type of weak and false God are white evangelicals praising such that their God needs lies. They're celebrating this victory as if it's God ordained, and we have factual evidence that the decision was based on lies. What does that say about your God, white evangelicals? Patreon.com/the BPD show to get access to it. If not, I'll see you later this week.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.